Well, everybody, I'd like to avoid it as much as you all would, but we got to talk about it. The Vikings might be trying to trade Danielle Hunter, and that makes me very sad, but we'll work through it together here on the Locked On Vikings podcast.
Ooh-wee! You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. As always, I'm your host, your pal, and the kid you copied off in math class. My name is Luke Braun. You can find me on Twitter at Luke Braun NFL. You can find the show on Twitter at Locked On Vikings. And today on the show, we are talking about Danielle Hunter. So that's going to be the headline. Probably by the time you listen to this, you might even know about what happens to Danielle Hunter. I know I keep saying that. Everything's going a lot slower than it usually does. There are some reasons for that. Maybe I'll have time to get into them. But yeah, it's taking a little longer. The deadline passed. The league year turned over, which means all the different void year contracts voided, including Anthony Barr's. He's officially a free agent. His cap hit has accelerated, so all that weird void year, maybe you can spread it out stuff, doesn't matter anymore. Now it's $9.8 million dead cap on the Vikings books for Anthony Barr. If they want to sign him back, they got to add to that. But the Vikings did get under the cap. They just haven't officialized any of their free agent signings yet. So the Pierce release did get them under the cap. But to do things like actually ink Harrison Phillips, they've agreed to terms. That's all good. It's all going to go down. He's going to meet the media today. But they haven't actually filed the contract yet, and they need to make some cap space to do that. And the same applies to Jordan Hicks. And they actually made a couple of other signings. We'll get to those later. But I want to talk about Danielle Hunter. They have an urgent situation. They have to deal with the cap before they introduce players to the media. You can't bring up a player to the podium that you don't have under contract. So something is going to happen. And they could very easily, stroke of a pen, go do a restructure of Dalvin Cook or whatever, get under the cap, get those players in, if that's all they're worried about. But here's me reading the tea leaves. I'm going to do a lot of that today. There's going to be a lot of speculation today. I know some people really like that. If you don't like that, if it's not your thing, my bad. We'll get back to reality tomorrow. But let me try to speculate. I don't think the Vikings right now, I don't think Kwesi and them want to restructure a lot of contracts. They seem to be behaving like a team that does not want to mortgage the books in future years. They just want to take it on the chin right now and kind of go from there with solved. They want to balance the books. It's been reported vaguely, but they're also behaving that way. They're not as interested, except with the Kirk Cousins contract, which is its own beast and can kind of exist in its own category. They aren't as interested in void years and kicking cap down the road and stuff. And that's why I think they're a little hesitant to actually do the restructure. They'll do it if they have to, but it would really suck if a quirk of the calendar, because you didn't quite get something done by a certain date, that you have to take a more inefficient path. So that seems to be why they're doing that. And one of the things they're trying to do is with Danielle Hunter's contract. He is the second biggest cap hit on the team right now. It costs $26 million on the cap. Next to Kirk Cousins, that's the biggest one. Now, we've talked about that contract a lot. In 2023, he is slated to cost $8 million. So obviously that's super out of balance and it's not meant to be played on that way. But this is where it gets a little weird. I have advocated for a simple restructure. Simply turn that big old roster bonus that's most of that cap hit into a signing bonus. He has a couple of void years in his contract, and you can just spread the whole thing out and make it all a little bit more manageable. I've advocated for this. Seems like that's not an option the Vikings like. I don't think the Vikings agree with me here. Instead, they have been a lot more interested in a true bona fide extension. And there are advantages to that. Even though it would cost more money, it would solve the issue, right? None of this void year, none of this cutesy roster bonus stuff, none of this sneaky trying to get away with paying Danielle Hunter less than he's worth. So just pay the dude what he's worth, and he's on a contract and he's fine, and then he's on your team and you've got a superstar, and he costs what a superstar costs, and that's okay because he's a superstar, and that's just the deal. Let's just do that. And I think that was the first idea the Vikings had with Danielle Hunter. And that was the reporting, that was all public. That's the reporting up until yesterday, up until Tuesday. Then Ben Gessling reported that the Vikings were actively trying to trade Danielle Hunter. And there were some reports before that teams were calling Danielle Hunter, or calling the Vikings about Danielle Hunter, saying, hey, we know his cap hit's big. What's the trade price? Blah, blah, blah. And those conversations weren't really going anywhere. Now the shoe is on the other foot. The Vikings are they're calling other teams saying, hey, what would you give us for Danielle Hunter? And let's start a dialogue here. And that tells me, this is my speculation, but when all the reporting says extension, and then suddenly it says trade, it means plan A didn't happen. And maybe there was just too much money, too much difference in money. Maybe there was something else going on or whatever. But whatever it was, it seems like it might not be the move with Danielle Hunter anymore. And now they're trying to trade him. Here's the thing. Danielle Hunter is a very, very good asset. And don't be fooled. And if you've been listening to this show for the last month, you know not to be fooled. But don't be fooled by his big cap hit this year. His contract is very reworkable. There isn't a dime of guaranteed money in it that a trading team would pick up. The only guaranteed money in it is in prorated bonus charges that stick with the Vikings even if they trade him away. So he's an insanely good asset to get, even after you factor in the injury stuff. He would cost, if another team traded for him and then did the restructure that I advocated, which would probably be a baseline starting point for what the true extension would be. He would cost, I think, an average of like $7 million a year. Like, this is less than Michael Pierce money. This is nothing for a guy like Danielle Hunter. And so even after you factor the injuries and stuff, which we've also talked about ad nauseum, he's still a very positive asset. So for me, if I'm in charge of the Vikings and I'm trying to trade Danielle Hunter, I am not picking up the phone for less than 2 first-round picks. Call me a homer, call me crazy for doing that or whatever. But if you understand how the cap works, and boy howdy, I hope the NFL teams do, and you understand how Danielle Hunter's injuries work, which again, hope the NFL teams understand where he's at with that and make a declaration. And honestly, if you're trading for him at all, you're probably at peace with the injuries. You better be willing to pony up. And that has to be it. And if we're going to trade away Danielle Hunter, this defense is broken. This defense has absolutely no chance to compete at an NFL level until it gets a lot of pieces. And for it to get that many pieces, Danielle Hunter has to give something back. You cannot just give that dude away for a conditional third. You got to get something back, and you got to get something back that is substantial. The only, and here's how I think about this. You have to, every move you make should be aimed at making the team better. Even if it's better, in the long term and better, but it'll take a minute to take, that's fine. But you have to make the team better. And I don't see, trading Danielle Hunter for a 3rd-round pick. That doesn't make the team better. It saves them like $11 million in cap space. Doesn't even save them that much in future years because the contract is super front-loaded right now. And that doesn't make, you can't take $11 million and make your team better. You can't take $11 million and get something better than Danielle Hunter with it. I'm sorry, you can't do that. But if you 2 first-round picks, maybe you can, right? Then we're talking. But really, I need that to be enough ammunition, a substantial enough pile of ammunition where it helps me get a better quarterback. Then we can talk about, did trading Danielle Hunter away make the Vikings better? If it helped them get a quarterback that turns the franchise around and takes them out of mediocrity and it becomes their Josh Allen, their Patrick Mahomes or whatever, then we can talk about it. But otherwise, it seems like a way to just get worse but slower. And the whole offseason has kind of been getting worse but slower. So far, right? We'll have to see what the finished product looks like, but obviously if you're losing Danielle Hunter, that's a huge blow to the team. And to recuperate that, it's going to take a lot more than $10 million and a mid-round pick. So we'll see what happens. There's a bunch more news and stuff that broke on Wednesday that we got to talk about. So we'll get into all of that. But first things first, let me talk to you about Grambling. BetOnline is your one-stop shop for all things Grambling. It is March Madness. The first 4 is already in the books. I hope y'all caught that Rutgers Notre Dame game. That was a banger. If you want to live bet on a game like that, Notre Dame kind of made a comeback, forced 2 overtimes. If you want to live bet on a game like that, you could have maybe said, yeah, Notre Dame will totally come back and win this. You might have been able to make some money. Go to the live betting apparatus on BetOnline. They've got all sorts of bracket contests and too. They got a $25 entry thing. I think you can win like $100,000 if you win. And then, of course, you can always bet on basketball. Bet on the T-Wolves. They're super hot right now. You can bet on baseball futures, soccer, golf, tennis, whatever you want. You can even bet on your favorite Vegas casino games. Just head on over to betonline.net and get yourself a Grambling. BetOnline, where the game starts. Thank you so much for making Locked On Vikings your first listen of the day, maybe your first watch of the day if you're doing this on YouTube. But go check out the Locked On NFL podcast on YouTube as well. They're doing the video thing as well over there. And you can find me on there every Tuesday. I'm one of the co-hosts of the Tuesday show on Locked On NFL. So let's talk about everything else that happened, the actual news. The Danielle Hunter rumor is the big thing, but they did make a couple of signings. The Vikings signed Johnny Munt, who is a blocking tight end. He's been with the Rams. He's a good veteran, like 5 years. I think he's got a good track record. Big Wes Phillips guy who was the tight ends coach over there. So this is very much, the coaching staff getting their guy. It's a 2-year deal with like no guarantees on it. So it's very small money, very small stuff, but he's like a blocking tight end. Think of him as a Ben Ellefson competition. I should also mention, we've got a lot of catching up to do. I should mention Tyler Conklin also signed with the Jets for 3 years, $21 million, which is enough to net a comp pick for the Vikings. I think they're sitting at 2 6th-round picks right now. And the Vikings also called Mackenzie Alexander and Dakota Dozier. They did that a couple days ago, saying we're not interested in bringing you two back. So which is like a courtesy move to kind of say, hey, don't wait out for us trying to re-sign you. We're not into it. Good luck everywhere else, like amicably, but that's a courtesy move that you do for kind of to just do right by the player. So those two, Mackenzie Alexander, Dakota Dozier, not coming back. Tyler Conklin has signed elsewhere. And then, of course, Xavier Woods and Mason Cole have also signed elsewhere. You factor in the Harrison Phillips contract, and we're sitting right now at projected a couple of low round comp picks for 2023. Of course, a lot remains to be seen there. So circling back around to Johnny Munt, he's got like 10 catches, I think, in the last year or so. Like he's got not a lot. And he tore his ACL last year, so part of that is a shortened season. But he's not exactly like a featured passing game weapon. Very much a blocking tight end type, and that's an important role that somebody has to fill. It makes you tight end 3, but that's a guy that's on the roster that does something. So there's that. And they signed Austin Schlottman, who was a depth guy for the Broncos, a guard/center, sort of a swing interior line dude for the Broncos for the last couple of years. Undrafted free agent in 2018. He's got like 7 starts to his name. Totally just like a kind of swing backup. Think of him as your Dakota Dozier. Think of him as your to go way back, like a Nick Easton or a Jeremiah Searles or something like that. Except he doesn't play tackle, or he hasn't played tackle. He's a guard/center depth guy, veteran minimum, all unguaranteed. So very much, again, the kind of guy that might not make the team. These are not huge moves, and people really like freaked out about how they're kind of doing small time moves and stuff. The prioritization on the team is not, don't think of how soon they do things. Think of the resources they spend on things. You could be sitting there waiting for a big free agent to get back to you for a deal. And then the agent of Austin Schlottman comes in and says, hey, we were talking to, he was in Denver. He played for Chris Cooper. So, your guy knows him, and your agent calls and says, hey, we would love to keep playing for Chris Cooper. How do you feel about veteran minimum? And you go, okay, yeah, sure. And you're still waiting for the free agent to get back to you. So timing wise, this is the kind of thing that sometimes happens while you're waiting for other bigger things to play out, a Danielle Hunter trade or a big extension or a bigger free agent to come give you a counter offer or something. Sometimes these tiny little things just sort of get tossed into the middle of it. That doesn't mean that they've prioritized Austin Schlottman over, getting a cornerback or something that they like deeply need. So don't freak out about that. The way I think about this too, is always about what resources did they spend? Did they spend $10 million on Austin Schlottman? Nah, that means they don't value it. They spent so little money on this guy, and honestly on Johnny Munt, that it's reasonable to not give them a 100% chance to make the team. They're just kind of guys that are going to come in, try to make the team, and it's fine. We'll talk about them more in the summer. And honestly, we kind of do that every year, and it gets a little annoying. There's this constant push to be like, what's going to happen? Tell me what's going to happen. What's going to happen? Now. Look, they're putting in 14-hour days, man. They are negotiating and working things out, and they've got all these different plans and all these things. We can't really know what's going on, but I think sometimes this is obvious, but we need to say it out loud sometimes. Just because we didn't hear about it doesn't mean it didn't happen. Just because we didn't hear about that many people that they've reached out to doesn't mean that they haven't reached out to people. In fact, most teams will reach out to probably 10 times as many people as they actually end up signing. You get into a lot of bidding wars, and look, there's 32 teams. Everybody's going to kind of be in on everything a little bit, and let's just see who they end up actually getting, and we'll judge things from there. Personally, I hate how this offseason has started. I think it's awful. I mean, of course I don't like the Kirk thing. If you like it, you're going to have a different opinion. That's totally fine. But I mean, that's going to be a negative for me. But even past that, even just put that in its own basket and evaluate everything else. They've gotten worse at two positions in nose tackle, and then they've gone from probably Anthony Barr to Jordan Hicks, which I believe is a downgrade from the level of play you got last year. Anthony Barr had a pretty good year, and Jordan Hicks I don't think is quite that good. Maybe he can prove me wrong. But it's, and then you go from Michael Pierce to Harrison Phillips, which the Vikings agree with me is a downgrade. They didn't want to do that. That was a backup plan. So you've downgraded at two positions. You've kept the specialists, you've kept the quarterbacks, and you signed a couple of can't body-ish guys that might be on the roster bubble. That's a bad start. That's not getting better while all these other teams are getting better. That's a bad start, but that doesn't mean that it's over. And there's still lots of great free agents on the board, a lot of really exciting names, and we'll see who they actually end up with. Not to mention, trades are on the board too. So they could end up with somebody playing cornerback or edge or whatever that you haven't even thought about yet because their board is bigger than yours. And that brings me to the last thing I'm going to say about this, which is a lot of times as fans, we'll look up, the free agents, and they're the hot names. They're the Brandon Scherfs of the world, or Darius Williams we get really excited about. Apparently they were in on him, but they got outbid by the Jaguars. And we get so attached to the idea of the name that we forget that, look, they need a corner. Whether that corner is Darius Williams or whether that guy ends up being Patrick Peterson or whether it ends up being a rookie or somebody else are all different levels of exciting, but it's going to be someone. If they go into the season starting Chris Boyd willfully, we have a lot of questions about why they said that they were contenders, right? So I implore you, I beg you, I encourage you, don't think of it in names. Think of it more in needs, I guess. Think of it in they need a guard. They need a center, at least to compete with Bradbury, if not just take over entirely. They need corners. They need edge rushers. And if they get rid of players, then they need replacements for those players. Whoever those guys are, don't say, well, that has to be Zadarius Smith or I am going to blow myself up. No, don't do that, right? That edge can be anyone. And if it's a really crappy player, we'll deal with it then. We don't need to have an opinion about it ahead of time. Think not about what they didn't do, but think about what they do. Think of what they actually do. And that will, I think, bring you a sense of peace, which is all I want. Speaking of a sense of peace, there is no greater peace than the couple of days after you get your car fixed where it works. That is what I want to take you to. And for that, why don't you head over to rockauto.com. Look, getting your car fixed can be kind of intimidating, especially if you don't know what you're talking about with cars. I don't know a ton about cars, so I can be a little intimidated by the process. Rock Auto is there to help you. Mechanics are going to try to take advantage of that in auto body shops. They're going to upcharge you for parts and stuff. They might charge you 30, 50, even 100% more for a part than it actually costs. Go to Rock Auto. Look up what that part is. Enter your make, your year, and your model. You're getting something that's compatible with your car. They'll do all that research and stuff for you and then deliver the part right to your door. You take that, you bring it to the mechanic and say, can you just install this? And I'll just pay you for that. And most mechanics will go for that. And that's it. That it's that easy, and you can save a ton of money doing that. So head on over to rockauto.com. Whether you're a DIYer that loves to work on cars, you can get whatever part you can dream of, just a person who needs your car fixed, or if you just need regular supplies like jumper cables or stuff that you should probably just have in your car, you can find that stuff there too. So head on over to rockauto.com, and whatever you buy, make sure you let them know that Locked On sent you. Because if you don't, Zoe, who's staring at me right now, will not stop staring at me. And I don't know how this is going to conclude, and I'm a little scared about it. Rock Auto, amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. All right, so for the last bit of the show, I want to touch on something that I've been thinking about, and it's a little out there. So we're going to put the tinfoil hat on a little bit. All right. And we're literally, you can hear it. We're putting on the tinfoil hat. So, this looks ridiculous on YouTube. Wow. So this is based on, an interview Darren Wilson, Doogie at KSTP, really, plugged in reporter, did a podcast at Climbing the Pocket with my good buddy Matt over there. And Miles and Ryan, and they talked about a couple of things inside the Vikings organization, about the Wilfs and Kwesi and the relationship and stuff like that. And there's also some other really good scoops on Danielle Hunter and what's going on there that helped inform me a lot doing all this. But I got to put on the tinfoil hat because some of the things that Doogie mentioned are starting to sort of add up with some of the other mysteries of the team. So I'm going to get a little speculative here. And there's a grand chance that I am wrong. And if I am, sure, that's fine. I've got a tinfoil hat on my head. I don't expect you to take me that seriously right now. But that said, let's dive in. So Doogie talked about Kwesi being handcuffed a little bit. He said yes, like directly, is Kwesi handcuffed? And he said, yeah, I think he is. And he said there were some interesting dialogues and back and forths and stuff. There is a rumor circulating that there was a trade offer that came from the Browns, 2 second-round picks and Baker Mayfield, which, if you remember, my trade value is way higher than I thought the trade value would be for Kirk Cousins. And Kwesi wanted to take it, but then higher-ups, ownership, etc., put the kibosh on it. Like that's the rumor, I guess. Doogie didn't address that one specifically, but it's also up on YouTube, too, so you can watch this interview for yourself. You don't have to take my word for it. But basically the implication is that Kwesi doesn't have carte blanche the way that Rick Spielman did. Rick Spielman could do what Rick Spielman thought was right. Kwesi doesn't seem to have that power. Obviously that's hugely concerning. You don't want the business end people getting into the football side. And even in a segment that the Vikings put up, it was like an intro to Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah. And he said, well, I don't think football and business need to be these like super separated things. We're all a big family. And I remember seeing that and my eyebrow kind of raised. I was like, wait, yes, I don't want the finance guy coming in, or like the marketing guy coming in and telling me what the wide receiver should be, right? Like stay in your lane a little bit. So that was always really interesting to me. And hearing Doogie kind of imply something very similar, that the higher-ups ownership are getting involved. If you remember during the Harbaugh drama before they hired Kevin O'Connell, one of the minority owners who has deep, long personal beef with Jim Harbaugh sort of got in there and meddled. But then a name came up, Andrew Miller, the COO. Chief Operating Officer of the Vikings, who was who led the charge in finding Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah and Kevin O'Connell. He led those task forces. And it seems like he has, I've got the tinfoil hat on, I can say it. It seems like he's made a bit of a power play. And he's a little bit more involved. And it seems, he's made a bit of a power play. Seems like he's gotten himself involved in the football side in a more permanent sense. And Doogie went on to talk about some of the contacts that he has inside the Vikings, people who have been there forever, and he said they feel like they're kind of walking on eggshells. And he made Andrew Miller out to kind of be this dictatorial strong man that's got everybody fearing for their jobs and all that. And it's a very interesting picture. Now, look, I don't know if maybe that just happens to be the clique that Doogie knows, and maybe other people have higher opinions of Andrew Miller or whatever. I can't say, and it's all secondhand, right? Go listen to him tell it for the actual truth of what's happening. But it got me thinking, and this is where I go way off the deep end. There's going to be nothing else but this. If you don't want to hear me Nancy Drew, come back tomorrow. It's fine. But here's the deal. He joined in August of 2019. And I always remember being really jarred, especially looking back at how mad Stefon Diggs got when he was here. I mean, in the 2018 season, he was coming off the miracle. I mean, he was a hero. He loved it. He seemed to get along with Kirk Cousins pretty much fine. I always kind of thought that was a Kirk Cousins thing because I remember watching the tape in 2019 when Diggs was really upset and he was visibly, getting frustrated. And part of it is just the passion of the game, right? Some guys just get really passionately upset when things don't go their way on the field. Justin Jefferson does too. I don't think that that's like a rift. I think that's just somebody who cares a lot, and I think that's actually a good thing. But it would always happen after a Kirk Cousins mistake. So in hindsight, I would kind of think about that and say, well, maybe he was angry about Kirk Cousins. And now in hindsight, I might have to change that opinion again and say, well, maybe that was the guy who joined that everybody says that they don't like working for, who joined that August. And then suddenly Stefon Diggs was so mad he was requesting trades by week 4. What changed? Well, a big giant executive came. And there's a lot of really cryptic things that you'll hear from people who are more plugged in about, the stories you could tell and all the things you don't know. Matthew Coller says stuff like that all the time. And I cannot help but wonder how many of those things involve Andrew Miller. and how the culture of the Vikings, I mean, under Mike Zimmer, in the pre-Kirk Cousins era, 2015, 16, 17, it was so tight-knit and fun, and everybody was having a good time, and the coaches and players joked with each other, and there was this open dialogue, and they talked about it all the time. I mean, go look at articles from back then. It was a far cry from all the culture of fear stuff we hear about from 2020 and 2021. And then later, it got worse, a lot worse. What changed, right? Did Mike Zimmer suddenly get replaced by an alien? Maybe. I've got the tinfoil hat on. Everything's possible. But again, the timing of that deterioration in culture seems to line up with the timing of Andrew Miller's arrival. So my question becomes, is Andrew Miller truly a toxic presence in the Vikings? And if he is, he has a lot of power and the ear of ownership. So is there anything we can do about that? And the answer kind of is just hope the Wilfs decide they don't like him anymore. And that's kind of all we can do. Or just hope that all he really wanted to be involved in was the quarterback decision, and how, the Wilfs and all the big people are involved in the quarterback decision because that's such a big one for the franchise. But when it comes to Danielle Hunter or Eric Kendricks or signing a big free agent or what you do in the first round, that gets more deferred onto the football people and who's actually in the room there. I'm very curious to look at the war room picture and see if I see Andrew Miller in it, or if I see the Wilfs in it or anything like that. And the Wilfs have been involved in some quarterback decisions before, so that wouldn't be a new thing. But of course, we want the owners to be as hands off as possible. And I've said a lot on this show, the Wilfs don't know anything about football. They have said that. So why they're getting involved in a football decision is, a little concerning. But I don't know. I don't have a lot of substantiation for the Andrew Miller thing. The dots are connecting, and I felt like I'm going to say it, but I don't want you to take me too seriously. So I put on the silliest thing that I could make in 10 minutes, which was a tinfoil hat. But I'm going to take that puppy off now. And we are going to, we'll talk tomorrow. I'm almost certain that I'm going to have something to talk about tomorrow. If stuff happens over the weekend, I'll figure it out, right? We'll talk about it. We'll get it all. If nothing else, we'll talk about whatever we have to do on Monday as well. So we'll talk tomorrow. We'll talk Friday. It's a daily podcast. We'll talk about everything. It'll be all right. In the meantime, check out the Locked On NFL Draft podcast. I will see you all tomorrow. And as always, Skull.